Nobody expected Brooks Koepka to end it like this, and by the time you hear the real reason, you might wish you didn't know. If you're a golf fan, what you're about to hear is going to change the way you look at Brooks Koepka forever. This isn't the story you saw on ESPN. This isn't the polished statement his team released. This is what actually happened behind closed doors. The pain, the pressure, the family crisis nobody talked about, and the decision that shook professional golf to its core. Stay with me for the next few minutes, because by the end of this video, you're going to understand why grown men in golf's inner circle went quiet when they heard the news. Before we go any further, I need you to do one thing for me. If stories like this, real stories, raw stories, the kind that make you feel something, matter to you, hit that subscribe button right now. Not for me. For yourself. Because there are creators out there chasing clicks with fake headlines and half-truths, and I promised myself I'd never be one of them. Every video on this channel is built on real research, real digging, real respect for the people we talk about. So if that means something to you, subscribe, hit the bell, and let's get into this together. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming in the next 60 seconds. Because here's the moment that's about to hit you. In December, with the golf world still buzzing about the 2025 season, a statement dropped that nobody saw coming. Brooks Koepka, 5-time major champion, the most feared closer in golf for half a decade, was walking away from LIV Golf. Not at the end of his contract. Not because the money ran out. He still had a full year left on his deal. Hundreds of millions of dollars. Guaranteed. And he walked away from it anyway. If you think that sounds strange, wait until you hear why. Because the real reason isn't about golf at all. It's about a hospital room, a fear no parent should ever face, and a man who finally had to choose between being a legend and being a father. Let's rewind for a second, because to understand how devastating this moment was, you have to understand who Brooks Koepka used to be. This was a man built differently. Not just physically, though yes, the guy looks like he was carved out of granite in some underground gym that doesn't officially exist, but mentally. Koepka didn't play golf like other players. Other players get nervous on Sunday. Koepka got calm. Ice in his veins. He famously said majors were easier than regular tour events because fewer players show up mentally ready to compete. That's not arrogance. That's a man who understood something about pressure that almost nobody else in the sport understood. He collected major championships the way other guys collect regular tour wins. 4 majors by the time he was 29. People were comparing him to Tiger Woods. Real comparisons. Not clickbait ones. And then, in 2022, Koepka did something that split the golf world in half. He took the Saudi money. He joined LIV Golf. And overnight, a chunk of the golf world turned on him. Commentators called it a sellout move. Traditionalists said he was chasing a payday instead of legacy. But Koepka, being Koepka, didn't flinch. He went out in 2023 and won the PGA Championship, as a LIV player. He silenced every single critic in one Sunday afternoon at Oak Hill. It was maybe the most defiant, most "I told you so" major championship win in modern golf history. LIV Golf needed a moment like that to prove their guys could still win at the highest level, and Koepka delivered it personally. For a while, it looked like Koepka had cracked the code. Guaranteed money. Reduced schedule. Still competitive at majors. It seemed like the smartest business decision in modern golf. But underneath the surface, something was already starting to crack, and it had nothing to do with his golf swing. Here's where the story turns, and I want you to really sit with this part, because this is the piece almost nobody talked about publicly when the news broke. Earlier in the year, Koepka's wife, Jenna, went through one of the most painful things a couple can go through. She suffered a miscarriage, 16 weeks into a pregnancy. She was open about it publicly, which took real courage, because most people go through something like that in complete silence. For Brooks Koepka, a man whose entire public identity was built on being unshakable, emotionless, ice-cold under pressure, this was the one opponent that no amount of mental toughness could outmuscle. You can practice 100 pressure putts. You can train your mind to stay calm in a playoff. Nothing prepares you for that kind of loss. And here's the part that should genuinely break your heart if you have any empathy at all. While the golf world was watching him grind through one of the worst competitive seasons of his career, missing cuts at 3 of the 4 majors, finishing near the bottom of LIV's individual standings, a season so rough that pundits were openly asking if Koepka was finished as an elite player, nobody knew what was happening at home. He was showing up to golf courses, putting on a brave face, competing at a level far below his own standard, while quietly carrying something that would break most people completely. Think about that for a second. The guy everyone was mocking for washing up on LIV was actually fighting a battle that had nothing to do with a golf ball, and that's exactly why, when the announcement came in December, it hit differently. The official statement was calm, measured, almost too polished, the kind of corporate language management teams write to protect an athlete's image. It said Koepka was stepping away to spend more time at home. That family has always guided Brooks' decisions. LIV Golf CEO added his own version, saying it was an amicable, mutual decision that Koepka was prioritizing the needs of his family. On paper, it reads like a routine athlete retirement statement. But when you know what came before it, the miscarriage, the 2-year-old son at home, a wife who had just been through something unimaginable, that same statement becomes one of the most quietly devastating things you'll read in sports this year. Now here's where it gets even more interesting, because Koepka didn't just walk away from LIV Golf. He walked away from it with a full year left on a contract worth an enormous amount of guaranteed money. Think about what that means. This wasn't a guy whose deal was expiring and he was simply moving on. This was a guy who looked at generational wealth still sitting on the table and said, "No, I'm done, my family matters more than this contract." In a sport, in an entire era of professional golf, that has been defined by chasing bigger and bigger paydays, Koepka did the one thing nobody expected. He left money on the table for his family. If you've ever had to choose between a career opportunity and the people you love, you already know how heavy that decision actually is. But the story doesn't stop there, and this next part is why so many people are calling this the most surprising twist of the entire golf season. Just weeks after walking away from LIV, weeks, not months, Koepka quietly applied for reinstatement with the PGA Tour. The same tour he'd left behind in 2022. The same tour that had suspended players who defected to LIV without special releases. Koepka was going back, hat in hand, to rejoin the organization he'd publicly walked away from years earlier. And here's the kicker, unlike some of the other high-profile LIV defectors, Koepka never joined the lawsuits against the PGA Tour. He never burned that particular bridge. He kept his mouth shut, kept a low profile the entire time he was at LIV, and it turns out that quiet, respectful approach may have been the smartest move of his entire career, because it left the door open for exactly this moment. The process wasn't simple. Reports indicated Koepka would need board approval, input from player directors, a formal disciplinary and reinstatement review. There were real questions about whether the PGA Tour's new leadership would even allow it, especially with other LIV defectors still facing years of ill will from Tour loyalists who never left. Picture that pressure. You've already made the hardest decision of your professional life, walking away from guaranteed money to be present for your family, and now your return to competitive golf, your path back to relevance in the sport you've dominated, is sitting in the hands of a boardroom full of people deciding your fate. And then, the twist nobody saw coming. Koepka's return wasn't free. It came at a real cost. Reports revealed the terms included a massive charity donation, reportedly around $5 million, no PGA Tour equity shares for 5 years, no FedEx Cup bonus money for the entire 2026 season, and no exemptions into the Tour's biggest signature events. Read that again. The man who once dominated major championships, who once looked untouchable, had to pay his way back in like a rookie clawing for opportunities. No shortcuts. No special treatment. Just a 5-time major champion, essentially starting over, because he chose his family over his ego and his bank account. And here's the part that will genuinely give you chills if you've been paying attention to how this story has unfolded since. By springtime, Koepka was back playing tour events, showing up at tournaments like the RBC Heritage as a first alternate, literally sitting around for hours just hoping a spot would open up. The same guy who used to walk into major championships like he owned the building. There's something almost poetic about it. A 5-time major champion, waiting in a parking lot for 7 hours, hoping someone withdraws so he can get a tee time. That's not a story about golf. That's a story about humility, about what happens when a man chooses to rebuild his life from a place of love instead of pride. And looking back now, with everything that's happened at LIV Golf since, the ongoing uncertainty about the league's future, the constant speculation about which stars might be next to leave, the fact that LIV is essentially down to just 2 marquee names carrying the entire league on their backs, Koepka's timing looks less like a fluke and more like foresight. He got out. He rebuilt his relationships. He put his family first when it mattered most. And whether or not he ever wins another major, people close to the sport are already saying his decision might end up being remembered as one of the most respected moves in modern golf, precisely because it wasn't about golf at all. So let me ask you something before we go any further, because I think this is the real question hiding underneath this entire story. How many of us would have the courage to walk away from guaranteed money, from status, from the identity we've spent our entire life building, if it meant being present for the people we love during their worst moment? Brooks Koepka did exactly that. Quietly. Without fanfare. Without milking it for sympathy. He let his management release one calm statement, and then he simply disappeared from the spotlight to go be a husband and a father. In an era where athletes chase every ounce of attention they can get, that kind of quiet, private strength is rare enough that it deserves to be talked about properly, not buried under a two-line ESPN headline. Now here's something worth sitting with for a moment, because it changes how you look at every shocking athlete decision headline you'll ever see again. We live in a world that turns every departure, every retirement, every walked-away contract into instant clickbait. Star player quits, fans in shock. But behind almost every one of these headlines is a human being making an impossibly hard choice, usually for reasons that have nothing to do with money or performance, and everything to do with something happening far away from the cameras. Koepka's story is a reminder that the scoreboard never tells the whole story. The stats never tell the whole story. Sometimes the real story is happening in a hospital room, in a quiet conversation between a husband and wife, in a decision that never makes it into a press release. If this story moved you even a little bit, that's exactly why I make these videos. Not to chase drama for the sake of drama, but to actually dig into what's happening behind the headlines and tell it with the respect it deserves. If you want more stories like this, real ones, deep ones, the kind that make you stop scrolling and actually feel something, make sure you're subscribed, because there's a lot more coming, and trust me, you're not going to want to miss the next one. Let's talk about what happens next, because Koepka's story is still being written in real time. As of right now, he's back on the PGA Tour, rebuilding his ranking points, rebuilding relationships with players he once left behind, and doing it all without the safety net of guaranteed LIV money. He's partnering up with tour veterans in regular events, grinding through rounds the same way he did as a young player trying to make a name for himself, except this time he's doing it as a 5-time major champion who's already proven everything he needed to prove. There's something almost full circle about that. The kid who once had nothing to lose is now the veteran who's lost almost everything material and is starting over anyway, because what matters most to him isn't sitting on a leaderboard. It's sitting at home. And here's a detail that puts the entire situation into perspective. Rory McIlroy, one of the most respected voices in the entire sport, someone who has never been shy about criticizing LIV defectors in the past, publicly advocated for Koepka's return to the PGA Tour. Think about the weight of that. This is a player who has had every reason to hold a grudge against anyone who took Saudi money and turned his back on the tour, and yet McIlroy specifically stood up for Koepka. That tells you something about how Koepka carried himself during his time away. He didn't burn bridges. He didn't trash the tour on the way out. He didn't sue anybody. He just left quietly, competed with class, and came back with his head held high, and the guys who mattered most in the locker room respected him for it.